Energix is an Israeli company listed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, heavily involved in building energy utilities on Israeli-occupied territories overseas. Energix has been soaking up U.S. local, state, and federal subsidies unavailable to American energy companies. According to information obtained by the State Freedom of Information Act in Virginia, Energix wants to develop a dozen solar utilities across the Commonwealth. Only city and county boards of supervisors can give Energix the required permits it needs. So first, we look at an attempt by IRmep to warn the Rockingham County Board of Supervisors about Energix's corrupt business practices. Then we look into details about what those practices are.
Use this fine equipment to show you the slide that's sent you this morning?
You do. You can. Sure. Do you have a flash drive?
Yes, sir.
Doesn't have any kind of bugs or anything in it.
Can I pull this down? Oh, okay. Okay.
Does he need a mouse or can he just use a touchpad?
How long does the slide for me?
Well, I'm both sides. I let him go over so
You check.
I did. I get it. Been cutting them off at about 3 seconds before it goes off. We're moving on pretty good.
Yeah, we're getting close. So I just wanted to say this is the presentation I sent all of you this morning. My name is Grant Smith.
You may move your ass out.
Thanks. I'm from the Institute for Research Middle Eastern Policy in Washington, D.C. I've spent 3 years investigating Energix, and I have filed 90 Freedom of Information Act requests across the state of Virginia.
If you had presented this to us and it's something that we can see,
Did you receive it, sir?
that would be great.
Yeah, we did.
However,
Yes.
if your presentation does no direct
Has direct involvement with land use.
with land use
Yes,
in
sir.
Rockingham County,
Absolutely.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There seems, okay, so let's just flip through these land use issues. You know, the point I want to make is that Energix basically has 3 core comparative advantages to other companies. Number one, it expropriates the property rights of communities where it does business. Number two, it captures, in many cases, through backroom deals, the government officials who regulate it. Number three, it marginalizes and strikes back when those communities rise up against it. This is one of their facilities. Again, you don't want to hear about overseas. This is a cage facility of 24 acres of land that do not belong to Energix, that it seized from the surrounding community in its Middle East, North Africa market. And what was gotten to as far as property values is that every single person surrounding this particular site, if you take a real peer-reviewed study, non-industry funded, and multiplied by adjacent properties, Energix would have had to have paid $26,000 to each adjacent property in order to make them whole, according to the LBJ School of Public Policy, Solar Energy, and Property Value Report. What are they going to do instead? At some point, they're going to offer $50,000 to you, the County Board of Supervisors, to do something like low-income housing. If you're like Campbell County, you'll turn it down because that's actually illegal to take that kind of money. Energix is only here because of its government sponsor, Virginia Israel Advisory. Sure, I'm just going to.
We do not need to see any more slides. If you'll take your slides down,
No,
I'm
sir.
going to gavel you
insist.
down.
You need to
I do
see
find
this.
this out of order. Please sit down and remove yourself from the voting immediately.
Making a big mistake, sir.
Now, I will look at your slides as we will too, but I do believe this
Right.
is
Can I ask
completely
my
out of
question about
order.
Energix?
This is completely
Can I
out of
ask my
order.
question?
You may.
I would like to know if Energix will stop violating the property rights overseas of surrounding communities before it turns a single additional shovelful. And
The question is out of order with this hearing. Is there any other opposition to come before this board? Yes, sir.
Somebody in the back is reading.
Your opposition must be to this permit in this county on point. Otherwise, this board will not hear it.
This substation you see behind me is one of the reasons that Energix wants to build a 32 megawatt facility to generate solar energy here in the scenic valley. But if you look at Energix's core business model, there are really three comparative advantages that Energix is taking advantage of, and they're not really those of a legitimate company. Number one is to expropriate, that is to take and use resources that surrounding communities have and to take it without compensation. The second is capture, that is regulatory capture through backroom dealings. And finally, marginalizing and striking back against those who finally figure out what's going on and rise up against Energix. But one leading indicator are Energix's issues in the Matiram solar fields in the West Bank. Why did Energix expropriate 24 acres of land in the Israeli-occupied West Bank to build a solar array? Because acquisition of suitable, appropriately zoned land and permits is critical to completing a project. And if you can simply expropriate territory for your plants without paying anything, well, that vastly improves your bottom line. So let's talk a little bit about what is Energix appropriating here. I just spent some time driving around some of the back roads. Yeah, there are a couple farms for sale, but there's a major tourist attraction up in the hills called Endless Caverns. And it's really quite beautiful rolling terrain that has a lot of inherent beauty. But what Energix is after is to essentially take $26,000 from each property owner here without compensation. That would be the minimum, because a lot of these properties are worth considerably more than the national average. But there's a study out of LBJ School of Public Policy which puts $26,000 at the mean of property value decline when you're within a mile of a utility scale solar energy array. So these landowners are going to take a hit at least that big. But what will Energix likely pay? Well, it's not going to pay landowners anything, except for those who are selling their land, or rather leasing it to Energix. What they usually do is pay $50,000 to the county, and then the county will take that into account when it gives them a special use permit to rezone this land to use it for what's an industrial use, essentially, solar energy generation. Energix made an offer to a county in Campbell County in 2019 and wanted to give them $50,000 for low-income housing, but the city or the county attorney simply said, you know what, that would be illegal, we can't do that. And so they turned Energix down.
Anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this special use permit on Gladys Road, please come forward. Give us your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
You're going to be the petitioner, aren't you?
I am.
Okay.
My name is Ken Neiman. I'm Senior Vice President of Development for Caden Energix. We're located in Arlington, Virginia. I live and work in Alexandria. One thing we have added, and I hope the county attorney doesn't trip me up on this, but we are offering a contribution to the extent you have one, a low-income assistance program in the county to help folks pay their electric bills. And that's a condition we're prepared to include as a stipulation in this special use application.
Does any board member at this time have any questions? I'd like to ask the attorney what was being proposed right there on the low income for his electric bills.
Briefly, I'll just address a couple of things that came up. The applicant has offered and put forward a few conditions that were not previously requested by the county, one of them being update the bond every 5 years and change the bond amount as is necessary. That is an acceptable condition. Recall this is a conditional use permit. The supervisors may impose any reasonable condition having to do with the use of the land itself and any restriction necessitated by the use that is being proposed. So the updating the bond every 5 years, no inverters within 400 feet of home were two conditions that were stated that the applicant was willing to accept. Both of those the supervisors may choose to impose as conditions if you would like. As far as a contribution to low-income housing, though I applaud that they're willing to do so, they should do so voluntarily. This county cannot require and should not require as a condition of granting this permit that they do so. It's my opinion that would not be legal.
But Energix can override the will of a community because of the level of regulatory capture that it's able to mount. Energix Renewable Resources and all of its subsidiaries in Virginia wouldn't even be in this country without the Virginia Israel Advisory Board, which is an export promotion agency, the only one of its kind, embedded inside the state government. And so it subsidizes Israeli companies to come in here to Virginia and compete with Virginia companies and U.S. companies. The only reason then Energix is here is because they've got this state government agency opening doors. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between Virginia Israel Advisory Board members and the companies they're bringing in. For example, VIAB's Southwest coordinator, Aviva Fry, met with the governor's office and state energy regulators as a VIAB official, but was simultaneously serving as Energix's U.S. corporate representative. And through the Freedom of Information Act, we've gotten all sorts of documents of Aviva Fry setting up meetings as a VIAB official only to ask for all sorts of favors from the governor's office and energy regulators. So there's sort of endemic conflicts of interest inherently by being one of these portfolio companies. In May of this year, the State Inspector General uncovered a corrupt deal involving presentation of vastly overvalued portfolios of mostly unfinished Energix projects presented by VIAB Chairman Chuck Lessin, because he wanted to get out of his own $210,000 debt to the Tobacco Commission for a failed VIAB project that he was personally involved in. And that's how capture by VIAB of the state government soon leads to corruption. It just immediately segues into that sort of behavior. On the documents submitted, you can see that Energix projects were vastly overvalued. For example, they said that the Energix Chesapeake project, which I've also visited, would have a capital expenditures of $45 million. But if you look at their building permit application, it says 23. So there's a lot of puffery going on. The State Inspector General then issued a letter saying this VIAB deal was wrong, and it reveals again how the costs of government capture cascade as Energix and VIAB win special privileges that competitors can't access. So only regulatory capture really explains why Energix gets these special sweetheart deals. For example, they received $2 to $5 million in CARES Act PPP loans. That represented, in the $350,000 and above category, that represented a third of all PPP loans in that category for the entire state of Virginia. There was Energix just soaking up those forgivable loans. And last month, the Virginia Jobs Investment Program announced it'll subsidize Energix's human resources costs to open its headquarters in an Ohlone Hetz, that's its parent company. It's also involved in illegal settlements, but they're going to finance part of their opening up a headquarters in Arlington County. So no other solar company is getting this kind of subsidy in Virginia. It's just been lavished with them. But that's because other solar companies actually compete. They don't have these powerful allies ensconced inside the state government. They have to actually win their deals on the basis of comparative advantage. The final thing that's interesting is that when Energix enters a community, it exerts undue influence on government. For example, the Virginia Coalition for Human Rights filed some complaints with new Kent County officials warning them about Energix practices as they considered an Energix solar energy array. And what did New Kent City Planner Kelly Leduc do? Did she pass the complaint up the chain of command? Address each point with the seriousness it merited? No. 3 days later, she passed it on to Energix's Kenneth Neiman, the kind of deal maker who travels these back roads looking for properties. And Kenneth Neiman, in the intervening 5 months, hasn't answered a single question raised in this letter. So it's really, once you've got Energix in your community, they're inside your government too. So what happens when Energix has enough marginalized communities protesting its questionable dealings? Well, once again, we can look to its overseas markets, and that's kind of a leading indicator. When communities living near massive Energix wind turbines, again, in the Middle East, North Africa market, specifically the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, complained that these energy export-driven turbines were reducing arable land, endangering wildlife, distorting and negatively altering the landscape, and hitting their tourism industry. Kind of like here, once again, endless caverns right up there. Well, what did Energix do? They also made the complaint they were destroying cultural traditions tied to the land, and that none of the electricity was really benefiting them anyway. It's all being exported to Israel. So what did Energix do? It sued them in Israeli court, where it really holds all the cards. It can sue them for basically mounting a boycott of Israel, when all they were really trying to do is express the fact that they had gotten a raw deal from Energix. So in conclusion, this could be the fate if this beautiful part of the county and the officials over in Harrisonburg decide to give them a 35-year permit to operate out here. Anyway, if you want to know more about Energix, VIAB, and the cloud of corruption that envelops this pair of entities wherever they operate in Virginia, please see IRmep.org and the many, many sections of the Israel Lobby archive at www.israellobby.org. Isn't this beautiful? It's just gorgeous. Listen to those bugs. Nothing like the crickets. Wow. That's definitely a substation. Okay. Thank you.